Hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan Davis, and I am one of the instructors in geospatial technologies at Southern New Hampshire University. This is the second video of the query assignment for spatial awareness, and in this video, we are going to go over how to use the Select by Location tool in conjunction with the Select by Attributes tool. So to get started, we're going to bring in some spatial data. One of our files is going to be the AZ cities and towns, just like the second video. And the second piece of information that we're going to bring in is the reservations. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the reservations file, and I just have all reservations here. Maybe we'll use a different one that includes the Navajo reservation. So we're going to bring this in, and there we have all the ones that we want to use. So in this file, we have all the cities and towns, and we have all the reservations, the tribal lands in Arizona. So now we can start asking questions. So if someone came up to you and asked you how many towns in Arizona are on tribal lands, how would you go about finding that out? Well, that's a very difficult question if you don't have that information on hand. Like the process of going through and trying to find the spatial relationships between cities and tribal lands, it would take a lot of research, it would take a lot of time. But if you have ArcMap, if you can study how things relate to each other in place, you can answer that question in a snap as long as you have that information. So if we look in our AZ cities and towns attribute table, we can see that we have the name of the city, we have county, we have elevation, and we have population, but we do not have on tribal land in the column. If we had that in the column, we could just use the select by attributes and refer to the column here if it's on tribal land and just say, on tribal land equals yes. And that would identify all of the towns that are on tribal land if we had that information, but we don't. So if it's not in the attribute table, it can't be answered by asking questions to the attribute table. We might be able to answer the question by using select by location. So how do you select by location? Well, you go to the selection tool and on this the top of the program, and if you go to selection, select by location, that opens the select by location tool. So this is set up much like the select by attributes. You have all of these different options here. But one of the things you have to remember is our target layer is what we want to be selected, and our source layer is what we're using to identify the features. So if you want to know what towns are in reservations, we're looking to identify towns. So that is our target layer, and our geometry, our geography is our reservations. So we're going to want to select AZ cities and towns as our target, as what we want to select, and our source layer as the Arizona reservation. There are a couple of options you can use that you can study relationships select by location. So if we go to this drop-down menu, you have intersect the source layer feature, are within a distance of the source layer feature, contain the source layer feature, are within the source layer feature, are completely within the source layer feature. So some of these, as you can see, they're close but not exactly the same. So one is are within the source layer feature, and then you have another is are completely within the source layer feature. Because some of the geographies, you can do this select by location. You might want to know what rivers are in a certain area. So if you have a river shapefile, you can ask what rivers are in the White Mountain Apache reservation. So you could go are intersected within the source layer feature, and it'll identify. But if you want to know what water bodies are completely within, not rivers that go through it and go into other areas, you can ask a different type of spatial location question. So what we're going to use here are within the source layer feature. So we want to know how many cities are on the reservation. So when we click apply, you can see if we move this that all the ones that are lit up in blue are cities that fall within, or towns that fall within the boundaries. So if we go into our open attribute table, we have all of these towns, 332 of them, that are identified as being towns or cities or historical cities that are in tribal land. So as you can see on the population, some of them do not have an existing population currently. So some of them are historical cities and towns. So if you want to sort on one of these fields, you just double click. Then we have lowest to highest here. If we double click again, we have highest to lowest. So we're showing Tuba City is the most populated area, or most populated city or town, according to our attribute table. So we've identified all of the cities and towns that are within tribal land. So that's the first one. Now there's another type of tool. So it's like we can use geometry to find out, or we can use select by location, the geography, to understand what are areas or what are cities that are within tribal lands. But what if we want to know if there are any cities and towns that are close to tribal lands, not just within, but are within a certain proximity? Well, if we go to our select by location tool, we can ask that question. So if we choose our spatial selection method as are within a distance of the source layer feature, and we have our drop down here so we can pick what our distance is. So for instance, I'm just going to select 5 miles. So if I type in 5, I can ask what cities and towns are within 5 miles based off this selection method of tribal lands. So when I click OK, we have all these new areas that are selected that are just outside the reservation. So you can use it to find what's within, or you can find things that are close to, based off, and that's some of the options that you can use. Now we've identified cities and towns that are within 10 miles of tribal lands. But what if we want to find out? You saw how many cities and towns had 0 population. Well, what if we only want to know what cities and towns have a population greater than 0, so that have people living on them? Well, we have this select by location, but we could also build on this select by location by going to select by attributes, and then population is greater than 0. So that will select all of the towns that are greater than 0, but we want it to pull from the current location. So we want to say in our select by attributes method is to select from the current selection. So we want cities and towns that have a population greater than 0 only from what is already selected. So when we click apply, you see a lot of our towns have disappeared. Our historical towns that have no population are no longer selected. So when we click OK and go to AZ cities and towns, we have 202 towns that are within 10 miles of tribal lands that have people living in the town. So that's the basic functionality of the select by location tool and how it can be combined with the select by attributes. But if you needed to share this specific piece of data, I'm not going to create a permanent shapefile, but if you want to create a permanent shapefile of this, you just go to data and then export data, and you can export it as a shapefile. But I'm only going to create a selection from this, a temporary file from this information. So I'm creating a layer from my selected features. So if I turn off my AZ cities and towns, what's left here are the only towns that are in tribal lands or within 5 miles of tribal lands that have people currently living in the town boundaries. Thank you for your time, and have a great rest of your day.